Warami, welcome. My name is Anna Cossu and I'm a curator with the Museums of History, New South Wales. I'm speaking to you from the Caroline Simpson Library here at the Mint in Sydney on Gadigal country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to the strength and resilience of First Nations people and cultures. This video will briefly outline, using objects from our collections, how to do a significance assessment based on the steps set out in Significance 2.0, the national guideline used by collecting institutions across Australia to assess and communicate the significance of objects and collections. A significance assessment is a process of studying and establishing the meanings and values of objects and collections. So basically, assessing why an object or collection is important. A significance assessment can be done on a single object or a group of objects. And you may already be doing some of the steps of this assessment process as part of your museum's acquisition and cataloguing process. Significance is based on gathering and collating good records about the objects and collections that we care for. And these records are key to answering questions now and in the future. So, the first step for a significance assessment begins with creating a file, and this can be paper or digital, where all the information about the object and its history is collated and stored. This may include receipt forms, correspondence with donors, research notes, copies of reference material, and photographs. So this file is called an object file, and it's a working file that should be updated when new information comes to light. So researching the history and provenance of an object or collection is the essential part of the assessment process. Research illuminates the history of an object, its connections, and its value. The provenance of an object or the collection refers to the chain of ownership or the life story of the object. Who created it, made it, wrote, owned it, or used the object? And is there evidence that sheds light on this? When, why, where was the object used or made? And what is the history of the object or collection? And does that history and provenance of the object connect to an event, person, place, or theme relevant to your museum, town, or region? How is it important? Talking with donors and or owners to find out as much as possible about the object or collection is an essential step in the assessment process. These conversations are best done before or at the time an object comes into the museum, as it can be sometimes difficult to reconnect with donors or owners later. A simple and effective first question to a donor could be, tell me about this object or collection. Why is it important to our museum, to our town or region? So let's look at a child's homework book that is over 100 years old. In the case of this exercise book, provenance is easily established. The owner has written her name neatly on the inside front page, Dolly Youngeen, and she's also written the name of her school, Fort Street. This object was donated by the grandchildren of Dolly, so the chain of ownership or provenance is well established. Conversations with the donors told us that Dolly continued to use and add to this book long after she finished school and left Susanna Place. And this is demonstrated in the later recipes and snippets cut from newspapers that have been pasted into the book. Dolly Youngeen and her family lived at Susanna Place Museum, a row of 4 houses in the rocks that is now one of the museums in our care. So built by Irish immigrants in 1844, the houses have survived largely unchanged through the slum clearances of the early 1900s and the redevelopment plans that took place in the 1970s. So Susanna Place was lived in for almost 150 years, and today as a museum it tells the stories of the families who called it home. The museums had researched the Youngeen family and were fortunate to record an oral history with Dolly's brother in the early 1990s, and the family donated a photograph. This homework book directly connects us to Dolly and her childhood at Susanna Place, and in particular her schooling at the local public school. It is an evocative object and one that can tell many stories in the museum. But establishing provenance the chain of ownership is not always straightforward. This photograph album from the Museum of Sydney's collection, it's part of a large collection of over 300 Sydney Harbour Bridge souvenirs gifted to the museum by historian Professor Peter Sperrett, who has written extensively on the history of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. This album contains almost 400 photographs recording the construction of the bridge from all different angles. However, the person or persons who compiled this album is a mystery. But by researching the images, we have discovered many of them were taken by professional photographers, and many of the images can also be found in the State Archive collection. So this suggests to us that the album was compiled by one of the Sydney Harbour Bridge engineers. Research can take time, so think about what you need to know about the object to make an informed assessment about its importance to your collection and the community. And at this stage, it can be also helpful to list areas for additional research in the future. So during the research phase, it's important to talk to donors, owners, users, and relevant community groups to ensure that the context, provenance, and potential social values are fully understood. There may be people in your community who have information about that object, or they might be an expert knowledge holder of similar items or the subject matter. It is also important to understand the context of an object. What is its relationship with other objects? Where is it used? And how does it relate to the history of the area or a place? There are many existing resources that can help us research the history of an object and its context and compare it with similar items. So this exercise book connects to another object in our collection, a School of Cookery certificate, awarded to Dolly Youngeen in 1912. The certificate was awarded within the context of the New South Wales public school system and the teaching of cookery at the time. So Dolly's workbook entries tell us the types of dishes and techniques that were deemed necessary for a girl to know in the early 1900s, and these include rules for making the perfect cup of tea and setting a table. The State Archives hold the New South Wales public school files from 1876 to 1979, so they are a useful starting point for researching Dolly's homework book and certificate. The archives offer an Ask an Archivist service to help point researchers to the most relevant records. They also hold many photographs in their collection, including a cookery class dated to 1910, just 2 years before Dolly was probably standing in that same classroom. We can also look at another person connected to the certificate, the person who signed it, the teacher. By tracing Dolly's teacher in the archives, we were able to uncover Dolly's cookery exam results. She achieved a reasonable 59% for the theory component of the cooking course. The part of the significance assessment process is to analyse and record the fabric of the object, documenting how it works, what it's made of, its manufacture, patterns of wear, repairs, adaptations, its condition as well. So let's look at another object. In this case, a neck-to-knee apron, we can see it was made by repurposing and embellishing jute hessian from an old sugar sack. The original stamp markings from the sack can be seen on the back of the garment. So it reads Colonial Sugar, pure cane sugar, 70 pounds, Sydney, packed 7th, 44. Now these numbers suggest the date the apron may have been made, around 1944. We should also look to understand the object in relation to similar items to clarify its significance. Is our object in better condition, better documented? Again, we can look at existing resources to get started. So for example, eHive is a web-based collection cataloguing system where hundreds of museums, including many small museums, yours might be one of them, have shared their collections. If we search for hessian aprons, we can see there are several different examples to compare our apron to. You may also know of other regional museums that have similar items in their collection. So for example, the Pioneer Women's Hut in Tumbarumba has many hessian aprons. So although commonly associated with the 1930s Great Depression era, research indicates hessian aprons were made well into the Second World War when fabric was still scarce. Many large museums have made their collections accessible online. So for example, the Powerhouse and the National Museum of Australia. And these are good places to check. If we search the Powerhouse's collection, there are a number of aprons listed. And these listings usually include a description, a potted history of the object, and that can prove useful in understanding the object that you are researching. In the case of a donation offer, if we conclude that the item is not significant to our museum or collection, assessing it against similar items can identify other collections that may be more relevant to, so a different museum, or a council, or a state collection. The steps we've just completed should give us a good understanding of the object or collection. And with this information, we can now assess its significance against the 4 primary criteria in the Significance 2.0 process. Significance 2.0 is the national guidelines developed here in Australia. The 4 criteria are its history and use, its scientific or research potential, its aesthetic or artistic significance, and the social values or importance it holds for past, present and future people and communities. Remember, an object can be significant based on only one of the criteria. So for example, Dolly's cookbook, its primary significance lies in its historic value to demonstrate the lives of the former tenants of Susanna Place, whereas the Sydney Harbour Bridge album is important for its historic and its research significance for future generations. Now, as well as the primary criteria, there are also 4 comparative criteria that help assess the level of significance, and these are provenance, rarity, condition, and the interpretive capacity or potential. And these can help evaluate the degree of significance of the object or the collection. So many of these criteria, such as provenance, condition, we've already looked at in the earlier steps of the significance assessment. So, the final step in the assessment process is to write a brief statement of significance, where we summarise the information we have found at each of the steps of the assessment process into a statement that communicates the meaning and values of the object, its significance, the why and how the object or collection is important. Statements of significance can range from 1 or 2 paragraphs for an object or longer for an entire collection. The statement of significance is like a sales pitch or an argument outlining why and how the object or collection is important. We can then use this statement to communicate the significance to visitors and our community in exhibitions, education programs, through public programs and online. The value of our collections can change over time, and this means significance statements should be updated from time to time. Now, along with the significance assessment, there are other factors that can determine whether to acquire an object or not. And these can include considering its future display purpose. So how will this object be used in the museum or community? Will it be research, display, online? And how will we share this object with the world who will want to see it? Now, the size of the object. Do we have space to display and store it? And if we don't, should we keep it in our collection? And the real costs of taking an object into our collection. How much will it cost us to look after this object for the next 100 years? And also considering if this item is a government record, should it be transferred to another entity such as the State Archives? In this video, we've stepped through the process of doing this significance assessment based on the steps set out in Significance 2.0. The document itself is also a valuable tool with examples, definitions and practical tips, and is available to download on the Museum and Galleries New South Wales website. There are also grants available from the Museums and Galleries New South Wales and the National Library of Australia if you need external support to prepare a significance assessment on your collection. Significance 2.0 encourages us to not just be curious about our collections, but to understand them, evaluate them, and communicate what makes them important for our communities now and into the future.